As Operation Stronghold commenced and the UCA Navy began seizing critical navigation choke points in the Helgen system, tensions within the Helgen Protectorate reached a breaking point. The ISA forces still stationed at Vekta and Helghan, remnants of an older security arrangements from the UCN era, were now seen as an eternal threat. A fifth column embedded deep within sovereign territory. Initially, the Helgen administration attempted to resolve the situation with restraint. Proposals were submitted for joint command realignment, offering ISA personnel local commissions within the Helgen Defense Forces. Economic incentives and legal guarantees were included. An attempt to co-opt ISA forces into the new order. Most refused. The administration responded decisively. An executive decree ordered the full expulsion of all ISA forces from Helgen control space. What was meant to be a swift and symbolic removal, however, turned violent almost immediately. On Vekta, Helgen security teams attempted to detain ISA Marine commanders but met with lethal resistance. Barracks, communication hubs, and naval logistic depots erupted in sudden gunfire. On Helgen, the situation deteriorated even faster, with ISA warships breaking orbit and firing warning shots at Helgen patrol ships, attempting to enforce blockade orders. Skirmishes ignited across both worlds. The Helgen Defense Forces, despite overwhelming local numbers, proved unprepared for the reality of full-scale combat. Hastily expanded from militia ranks, the HDF suffered from outdated equipment, insufficient training, and fractured command structure. The ISA Marines, in contrast, were elite professionals, hardened veterans of colonial conflicts with access to superior technology, tactics, and command experience. Though outnumbered, many ISA forces fought their way out, escaping into the hinterlands of Vekta or vanishing deep in space aboard fast frigates and blockade runners. By year's end, most surviving ISA forces had gone to ground, forming a decentralized resistance across the system. From hidden bases, concealed bunkers, and mobile flotillas, they launched hit-and-run raids, sabotaging Helgen infrastructure, striking supply convoys, and broadcasting anti-secession propaganda across Helgen space. The war had begun in earnest. The skies of Alpha Centauri, once the arteries of human commerce, were now divided into zones of conflict, marked by burning wreckage and silent orbital debris. The Protectorate was sovereign in name, but in truth its sovereignty would have to be won with blood. Under 2 years of tense build-up and violent skirmishes, a UCA Navy fleet, dispatched under Operation Stronghold, arrived at the Helgen system in full strength. Led by Admiral Solon Merrick, the fleet consisted of over 40 warships, including heavy cruisers, escort carriers, troop transports, and destroyer screens, the most powerful military presence ever deployed outside Seoul. Their first act was to rendezvous with the surviving ISA forces, ragged but determined remnants of the initial conflict on Vekta and Helgen. Once regrouped, the combined fleet executed Phase 1 of the campaign, the seizure of the Alpha Centauri navigational choke points. The slingshot corridors and Lagrange gates that linked the systems to the border human sphere. Within weeks, the UCA had locked down the major transit routes, establishing a secure corridor from Earth to the remaining colonies. When trade flow secured, Phase 2 began. The main force of the fleet turned toward Helgen, aiming to establish a flow blockade of the industrial world. The plan was simple: choke Helgen's orbital infrastructure, cut it off from fuel, trade, and interstellar contact, and forced the Protectorate to capitulate without the need of a planetary invasion. But the Helgen administration had other plans. Though lacking in capital warships, Helgen's custom fleet, a vast network of refitted patrol cutters, armed cargo ships, and escort frigates, and even drone platforms, had been secretly expanded, hardened, and coordinated in preparation for this very day. These were not frontline vessels in name, but in function they had become a navy. The UCA blockade formation moved into position around Helgen's orbit. The massed Helgen fleet, flying under civilian transponders, emerged from orbital blind spots and shadow zones. What began as a slow deployment turned into a full-scale naval engagement. Though outgunned and under-armored, the Helgen ships fought with ferocity and desperation. Swarms of drone fighters harassed UCA formations. Kamikaze shuttles rammed into sensor arrays. Modified haulers unleashed hidden torpedo racks before breaking apart in explosive escape trajectories. Helgen anti-orbital stations, built in secret along the upper exosphere, joined the fray with punishing railgun fire. The UCA, stunned by the suddenness and coordination of the attack, suffered early losses. But as the battle dragged on, the superior firepower and the discipline of the UCA Navy began to turn the tide. Precision orbital bombardments crippled Helgen's logistical ships. One by one, the civilian retrofits fell apart under sustained pressure. UCA's heavy cruisers, built for wars of domination, began to sweep aside the improvised resistance. Helgen's courage held, but his fleet cracked. By the battle's end, Helgen's orbit was ablaze, a graveyard of wreckage, drifting escape pods and silenced transponders. The UCA blockade was now in place, anchored by multiple carrier groups and orbital interdiction ports. The industrial heart of the Protectorate was under siege, but Helgen did not surrender. The attack had cost him dearly, but it had also revealed the truth to the system and the colonies beyond. Helgen would fight, no matter the cost. In the aftermath of the catastrophic naval defeat in orbit over Helgen, this time not in the silence of deep space, but in the destruction of the most iconic structure in the system. The Helgen orbital platform, once a symbol of interstellar commerce and technological ambition, was obliterated in a catastrophic explosion witnessed across the hemisphere. The station's lights winked out, its core ruptured, and within minutes, its superstructure disintegrated, showering debris into the upper atmosphere of Helgen and leaving nothing but a burning ring of wreckage in low orbit. What caused the disaster remains one of the most bitterly contested mysteries of the war. The United Colonial Nations was quick to release a statement, claiming that the Helgen personnel had sabotaged the station, rigging it for self-destruction rather than allow its capture. According to the UCA's Navy's account, the crew evacuated in escape pods and descent craft, abandoning the station to burn rather than surrender to Terran control. The Helgen administration, however, issued a very different narrative. According to them, the station was deliberately targeted and destroyed by UCA cruisers during the orbital battle, an unprovoked act of aggression designed to break Helgen's spirit and remove the last symbol of his independence. Both sides presented incomplete sensor logs. Both accused the other of information. No definite evidence ever emerged. But for the people of Helgen and Vekta, perception became truth. The loss of the station wasn't just strategic, it was deeply personal. For decades, the station had represented Helgen's rise from the dust, the promise of sovereignty, and the connection between the two worlds of the Protectorate. Its destruction was seen nothing less than a declaration of extermination. Within hours, the High Administrator of the Protectorate, flanked by defense ministers and civic leaders, issued a transmission across all channels. Let the stars record this day. Helgen offered dialogue and it was met with orbital fire. Helgen offered peace and it was answered with betrayal. As of now, the Helgen Authority is at war with the United Colonial Nations. We did not start this war, but we will finish it. Across Alpha Centauri, the war entered a new phase, no longer political, but existential. No longer about tariffs or titles, but about survival. The skies above Helgen ablaze, its fleet shattered and its orbital station reduced to drifting wreckage. The UCA Navy found itself in possession of space superiority, but not victory. Despite this devastation, the planetary surface remained defiant. Helgen's terrain was harsh, its atmosphere punishing, and its people, hardened by decades of industrial survival, an orbital invasion, dropping troops onto irradiated tundras and subterranean manufacturing zones defended by entrenched local militias, was assessed by UCA commanders as costly, slow, and strategically unnecessary. Admiral Merrick, now in full control of the blockade fleet, made the call. Helgen would be watched, not conquered. A picket fleet, comprising of destroyers, sensor platforms, and interdiction ships, was left to enforce the blockade and prevent smuggling or reinforcement from escaping the planet. With the industrial core of the Helgen Protectorate effectively neutralized, the UCA command turned its attention to the true seat of power and culture, Vecta. Unlike Helgen, Vecta was vulnerable. Its lush Earth-like biosphere made it ideal for orbital absorption and long-term occupation. Its cities are open, its infrastructure above ground, and its population, though proud, was less prepared for protracted resistance. More importantly, Vecta housed the Protectorate's central administration, its communication grids, and its civil leadership, and the economic brain of the Two-World Alliance. To crush Helgen's spirit, the UCA knew it had to take Vecta. By mid-year, the bulk of the UCA fleet, now reinforced by troop transports, logistic carriers, and orbital deployment craft, broke from Helgen orbit and accelerated toward Vecta under full battle formation. Recon probes preceded them. Communication jammers swept ahead in electronic silence. Behind the lead cruisers, dropships prepped for full atmospheric insertion. The war was no longer theoretical, no longer a question of politics. It was now a matter of occupation. Vecta, the jewel of the Helgen Protectorate, stood in the crosshairs. combined UCA and ISA fleet, fresh from its overwhelming victory over Helgen, entered Vecta's orbit in force. Facing them was little more than the battered remnants of the Helghan Customs Service, a few corvettes, retrofitted patrol ships, and orbital defense platforms, all hopelessly outmatched. The battle was swift. Helghan crews fought with courage but lacked both the firepower and coordination to resist. Within hours, Vecta's orbital grid had been dismantled, its stations silenced and its skies firmly under UCA control. On the surface, however, defiance was smoldering. The Helgen administration, broadcasting from the capital Arcology in Vecta City, declared it would resist to the last man. Emergency drills were conducted. The city's shield grid was activated. Orders went out for civil defense volunteers to prepare for the occupation. But resistance would not last long. In a calculated show of force, the UCA Navy unleashed a limited orbital strike, a demonstration barrage that targeted unoccupied zones of Vecta's wilderness with kinetic bombardment. Entire swaths of pristine forest were vaporized. The message was unmistakable. The full wrath of Earth could, and would, be unleashed, unless immediate surrender was given. Within 36 hours, the Helgen administration yielded. The UCA ground forces landed without resistance. Strategic infrastructure, spaceports, comm towers, transit hubs were seized. Civic buildings were surrounded. UCA Marines entered the government complex under full armor and arrested the senior leadership of the Protectorate in a swift and televised operation. The Helgen High Administrator was placed under custody. Senior civil servants and command staff were detained and placed in orbital holding facilities. Executives of the Helgen Corporation, viewed as enablers of the rebellion, were rounded up. But not all were caught. In the chaos of surrender, many high-ranking officials and corporate leaders vanished, slipping into lower ecologies, industrial zones, and the rugged Vectan countryside. Some boarded hidden ships, others went to ground, forming a nucleus of what would soon become the underground resistance. The Helgen administration was officially shut down. The Protectorate dissolved. The flag of peace, justice, and freedom was torn from buildings and replaced with the blue and gold of the UCN. Vecta had fallen, but occupation is never the same as control. In the shadows of shattered ministries and silent transmission towers, the embers of rebellion remained, and soon they would burn. When the courier ship arrived from Alpha Centauri, carrying encrypted reports of Vecta's surrender, Helgen's occupation, and the destruction of its fleet and orbital station, the UCN Senate convened an emergency session. The debate was brief and laced with bitterness. To many within the Senate, the rebellion had been a confirmation of long-held suspicions that the Helgen Protectorate had grown too powerful, too arrogant, too distant from Earth's ideals. The war had proved that independence, even wrapped in economic rhetoric, was treason in waiting. The verdict was unanimous and final. The Helgen are too unruly to ever integrate into the United Colonial Order. Rather than attempt reconciliation, the UCN issued an executive directive dissolving all plans for reconstruction under joint governments. Instead, Vecta's future would be placed entirely in the hands of the ISA. The Interplanetary Strategic Alliance, once a regional policing and support force, granted full civil and military authority over Vecta. A new administration charter was drafted, one that placed the planet under direct ISA oversight, eliminating the possibility of another Helgen-style government forming in its shadow. Stripped of legitimacy, the broken remnants of the Helgen administration, held under house arrest or in exile, could do little more than rubber stamp the UCN's terms. New colony ships carrying loyal UCN citizens began departing from Sol for Vecta. Scientists, engineers, administrators, and families selected for political reliability and civic obedience. These new colonists were granted priority housing and government contracts, and their presence signaled the beginning of a new demographic wave, what meant to dilute and replace the memory of Helghan defiance. Across the human sphere, the message received loud and clear: harsh consequences of rebellion. Mass arrests, orbital bombardment, loss of sovereignty, and occupation were not lost on other colonies, many of which had quietly sympathized with Helgen's earlier calls at anatomy. These sympathies vanished overnight. The UCN's right to regulate, tax, and control space shipping, once fiercely debated across frontier systems, was now unchallenged. The Helghan War had ended, but it had ended on Earth's terms. From the ashes of the Protectorate, a new era of enforced order began to take shape. The Protectorate dismantled, its leaders imprisoned or scattered, and the ISA authority installed as a new governing body. The UCN believed Vecta had been pacified, but beneath the polished uniforms and official decrees, resentment smoldered. While most Helgen-descended citizens of Vecta had no appetite for further conflict, many simply seeking stability, jobs, and peace after years of disruption. A smaller, radical faction refused to accept the occupation. To them, the fall of Helgen administration was not justice, but a betrayal, and they vowed that Vecta would never belong to Earth loyalists. These extremists, many with military training and deep ties to the former regime and corporate infrastructure, slipped into the cracks of arcologies and wildlands. There they began to form what the ISA would eventually call the Helgen Underground. They had no standing army, no flag, no fleet, but they had knowledge of Vecta's cities, access to hidden weapon caches, and support, quiet, reclusant, but vital, of a sympathetic population. By late 2202, the first attacks began. Improvised explosives detonated at ISA military depots and administration centers. Ambushes on transit lines, sniper attacks and bombings targeting UCN loyalists and ISA patrols. Assassination of collaborators, including Helghan seen cooperating too closely with the ISA. The ISA's response was swift and heavy-handed. Raids, curfews, blockades, and arrests became part of daily life in the outer districts. But every crackdown only seemed to spread the resistance further, driving it deeper into Vecta's sprawling infrastructure. Refugee slums, industrial tunnels, and forgotten arcology sectors became breeding grounds for insurgency. By 2204, it was clear Vecta was no longer an idyllic colony. The paradise had been shattered. Now it was a world divided.